A half-blind refugee who crossed Soviet lines as a child helped invent heavy metal with 3 words born from a thunderstorm. 25 million records sold. Rival biker gangs declared truces just to hear them. Then the immigrant discipline that forged their sound became the weapon that destroyed them. 9 fake bands simultaneously stealing their name. A federal lawsuit just to prove they existed. Their freedom anthem collapsed under iron control. This is the rise and fall of Steppenwolf. To understand why Steppenwolf fell apart, you have to understand where they came from. And John Kay's story doesn't begin in the sunshine of California's psychedelia. It begins in the frozen hell of East Prussia in 1944, as the Soviet Red Army advanced and the Third Reich collapsed. John Kay was born, Joachim Fritz Krauledat, on April 12, 1944. His father, a German soldier, was killed on the Russian front before Kay ever took his first breath. His mother, Elsbeth, was left alone with an infant in a war zone that was becoming a killing field. The Soviets were coming, and anyone in their path faced execution, deportation, or worse. Kay was just 4 years old. His mother made a decision that would shape everything about the man he would become. She paid guides to smuggle them across the border from Soviet-controlled East Germany into the West. Picture this: a woman and a small child moving through the Harz Mountains at night, under the threat of Soviet patrols, searchlights sweeping the darkness, the sound of gunfire in the distance. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. They made it, barely, and that crossing, that desperate flight toward freedom, became the psychological foundation of everything Steppenwolf would later represent. This wasn't the free love of the hippies. This was hard-won freedom. Survival freedom. The kind you earn by refusing to be crushed. But there was another element that defined Kay's entire identity. Something that would become his visual trademark and a constant source of struggle. He was born with a rare genetic condition that left him legally blind, completely unable to see color, and devastatingly sensitive to light. His world was shades of gray. In the rubble of post-war Hanover, his mother initially thought he was suffering from malnutrition. Kay could only see clearly at dusk. During the day, the sun was blinding agony. On stage years later, professional lighting rigs would have rendered him completely incapacitated without dark sunglasses. This wasn't rock star posturing. It was a medical necessity. And because he couldn't outrun the bullies who tormented him in German playgrounds, he learned to fight back with his fists. He developed a toughness, a refusal to be victimized, that would eventually manifest as an iron grip on every aspect of the band. In 1958, shortly before his 14th birthday, Kay immigrated to Toronto, Canada. He immersed himself in the raw energy of rhythm and blues, learning English from the rapid-fire patter of American disc jockeys on Armed Forces radio. By the mid-1960s, he had joined a group called The Sparrow, featuring keyboardist Goldie McJohn and drummer Jerry Edmonton. They became fixtures of Toronto's Yorkville Village, a bohemian enclave for social outcasts and aspiring artists. The Sparrow followed the classic trajectory of the era, Toronto to New York to Haight-Ashbury, chasing the counterculture dream. But by 1967, they were foundering, caught between folk rock sensibilities and a hunger for something heavier, darker, more dangerous. It was only after relocating to Los Angeles and facing complete dissolution that the identity of Steppenwolf began to take shape in a garage on Fountain Avenue in Hollywood. The transformation came through proximity to producer Gabriel Meckler, who lived near Kay and heard them rehearsing. Meckler, an Israeli-born producer for Dunhill Records, recognized something primal in their new sound. He suggested the name Steppenwolf, inspired by the Hermann Hesse novel that was sweeping college campuses. A story about a man divided between his human and wolf natures, unable to reconcile civilization with his wild soul. It was perfect. These weren't California dreamers. They were outsiders with something dangerous. The band's self-titled debut album dropped in January 1968, and it was a deliberate rejection of everything the Summer of Love represented. No flowers, no peace signs, no psychedelic optimism. This was darker, heavier, meaner. John Kay's gravelly baritone sounded like a man who'd seen the worst of humanity and lived to tell about it.
But the pusher is a monster.
The album opened with The Pusher, a Hoyt Axton song that drew a brutal moral line between marijuana and hard drugs. When Kay snarled the line about damning the pusher, radio stations banned it immediately. But the ban only amplified the song's power. This wasn't celebration, it was condemnation. Righteous fury captured on tape. But the song that would define them, and accidentally name an entire genre, wasn't written by Kay. It was written by Mars Bonfire, born Dennis Edmonton, the brother of drummer Jerry Edmonton. Bonfire had left the Sparrow to pursue a solo career and spent his days driving a used Ford Falcon through the mountains and deserts of Southern California. The song was born from that freedom, the wind, the open road, the feeling that anything was possible if you just kept moving. The now famous phrase heavy metal thunder came not from science but from imagery, a fusion of weather and sound. When he first presented the song to Steppenwolf, it was a quiet folk ballad. It was producer Gabriel Meckler and the band's arrangement that transformed it into the turbocharged riff rock anthem that would top the charts. Born to Be Wild exploded onto radio in the summer of 1968. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural detonation. The song peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. And suddenly, Steppenwolf wasn't just another band. They were the sound of rebellion, of motorcycles, of American freedom distilled into 3 minutes of raw power. But the song's true immortality came from an accident of film history. Peter Fonda was producing a counterculture film called Easy Rider, and he'd originally wanted Crosby, Stills and Nash for the soundtrack. But during editing, Born to Be Wild had been used as a temporary track to provide momentum for the opening scene. Fonda and Dennis Hopper on their choppers, riding through Monument Valley under an endless sky. The synergy between the music and the visual was so profound that it became impossible to replace. When Easy Rider premiered in 1969, it permanently embedded Steppenwolf into the American biker mythos. That opening scene wasn't just a movie moment, it was a statement of identity. The song became the unofficial biker anthem, the soundtrack to freedom itself. Kay later recalled performing in Texas, where rival motorcycle clubs, the Banditos and the Outlaws, would call temporary truces just to hear the band play their anthem. That's the power Born to Be Wild had. It could stop wars, even if only for one night. Between 1968 and 1971, Steppenwolf achieved something extraordinary. They a string of hit albums in rapid succession, a feat that required a punishing cycle of recording and touring that left no room for rest. Their sophomore album, The Second, featured Magic Carpet Ride, which climbed to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Why don't you come with me, little girl, on a magic carpet ride? The song's psychedelic intro and driving rhythm proved they weren't a one-hit wonder. They were a sophisticated unit capable of bridging the gap between underground FM radio and the commercial AM pop charts. By 1969, Steppenwolf was everywhere, on the radio, in the concert halls, on television. They were the soundtrack to the highway, the workshop, the barracks in Vietnam. This was the era where they were unstoppable. Steppenwolf sold over 25 million records worldwide during their peak years. They were one of the biggest touring acts on the planet, filling arenas from coast to coast. Steppenwolf wasn't just entertainment, they were validation. Working class validation, immigrant validation, the proof that outsiders could conquer the world on their own terms. But beneath the platinum sales and sold-out shows, something was beginning to fracture. The relentless pace was taking its toll, and John Kay's increasing need for control was starting to clash with the more collaborative, hedonistic expectations of his bandmates. By 1969, Steppenwolf had shifted toward overt political commentary with the album Monster. The title track was a 9-minute medley that provided a sweeping historical critique of the United States, from the treatment of Native Americans to the military-industrial complex that was consuming young men in Vietnam. Draft Resistor was particularly bold, offering a sympathetic plea for those who refused to serve. This pivot alienated their younger fan base while solidifying their standing among college protesters and the counterculture heads. But it came with a commercial price. Monster was the first Steppenwolf album not to produce a top 10 hit. The tide was beginning to turn. The freedom Steppenwolf sang about began to disappear within the confines of the band itself, and the primary source of conflict was John Kay's increasingly centralized control. Given his background, displacement, disability, survival, Kay's need for discipline and order was perhaps understandable. But it clashed violently with the expectations of musicians who wanted creative input and personal autonomy. Michael Monarch, the guitarist whose riffs had propelled Born to Be Wild to immortality, was the first to leave in August 1969. He later described the environment as one of bad blood, noting that Kay had essentially checked out emotionally, viewing the other members as obstacles to his solo ambitions. Monarch was just a teenager when he walked away from the band at the height of their success, a decision that was financially devastating but personally necessary. Rustin Morev, the bassist who provided the soulful foundation for their biggest hits, had already been fired in 1968. The reason was bizarre and tragic. Morevi had developed a paranoid fear that Los Angeles was about to be destroyed by a massive earthquake, and his terror made it impossible for him to show up for gigs. Kay had no patience for this kind of instability. He needed reliability, and when Morev couldn't provide it, he was gone. After a brief reunion, Kay fired Goldie McJohn, the keyboardist whose Hammond B3 organ was the second most recognizable element of the Steppenwolf sound. Kay cited a decline in the quality of his performances and erratic behavior as the reasons. But the real message was clear. Steppenwolf was no longer a band. It was a John Kay project, and anyone who couldn't meet his standards would be replaced. By 1972, the original lineup was effectively destroyed. On Valentine's Day that year, Steppenwolf officially retired. The dream was over, torn apart not by failure, but by the very control that had initially made them successful. Kay's refugee mentality, his need to survive, to control his environment, to never be victimized, had become the instrument of the band's destruction. Following the 1972 retirement, the Steppenwolf brand entered a chaotic period that can only be described as a nightmare of imposters and legal warfare. While John Kay attempted to establish a solo career, former members Nick St. Nicholas and Goldie McJohn saw an opportunity to capitalize on the band's enduring name. Between 1977 and 1980, there were 9 different versions of Steppenwolf touring the United States simultaneously. Many featured only one original member. Some consisted entirely of hired musicians with no historical connection to the band whatsoever. These acts played low-rent clubs and state fairs, significantly tarnishing the legacy Kay had spent years building. Kay described this period as watching a fake band playing low-rent club gigs, an experience that aroused his fighting spirit. But the chaos reached truly absurd levels with the bogus Deep Purple incident. Keyboardist Jeff Emery and guitarist Tony Flynn, who had performed in later non-original versions of Steppenwolf, decided to pivot to another classic brand when Kay began threatening lawsuits. In 1980, they recruited former Deep Purple vocalist Rod Evans to front a fraudulent version of Deep Purple. The tour was catastrophic. Fans rioted when they realized they weren't seeing the legitimate band. The resulting federal lawsuit awarded over $600,000 in damages to the real Deep Purple management, effectively ending Rod Evans' career. For Kay, this served as proof that protecting the band's name wasn't just pride, it was survival. In January 1980, Kay officially reformed the group as John Kay and Steppenwolf, a strategic legal maneuver to distinguish his legitimate lineup from the bogus versions still attempting to tour. Partnering with co-founder Jerry Edmonton, Kay took the necessary legal steps to establish sole ownership of the trademark. The rebuilding period was humbling. The group spent years working a punishing touring regimen, playing anywhere and everywhere to regain the trust of an audience confused by years of multiple Steppenwolf incarnations. This commitment to the grind resonated with the band's core demographic of blue-collar American men and women who respected what it took to rebuild a reputation from scratch. The final legal chapter came with several legal cases versus Steppenwolf Productions. Founding bassist Nick St. Nicholas had signed a contract in 1980, waiving his rights to the name Steppenwolf for $3,000. But when he later began performing with the world classic rockers and identified himself as a former member of Steppenwolf, Kay's company sued for trademark infringement. The federal court eventually ruled in favor of St. Nicholas, establishing a crucial precedent regarding nominative fair use. The court held that a contract relinquishing trademark rights does not prohibit an individual from making truthful historical references to their own past. It was a bittersweet victory. Kay owned the brand, but the other original members could not be legally erased from the history they helped create. The band was forever legally and personally divided. Ultimately, the story of Steppenwolf is defined by the tension between the ephemeral nature of a rock group and the permanence of a cultural anthem. Born to be Wild has achieved a level of immortality that transcends the band's internal drama. It has been used in over 50 major films and television shows, serving as a universal shorthand for rebellion, freedom, and the open road. Steppenwolf represents a specific kind of grit. They were immigrants who understood the price of freedom better than many of their native-born peers. They were a band that pioneered the heavy metal sound not through artifice, but through a visceral, riff-driven reaction to the world around them. And while the band was eventually torn apart by egos, the music remains a singular, indestructible artifact of an era when rock and roll was the primary vehicle for personal and political liberation. John Kay eventually retired the band in 2018, following their 50th anniversary tour. He transitioned from rock star to wildlife advocate, using the remaining power of the Steppenwolf name to fund conservation efforts. In the end, the lone wolf survived his own legend, presiding over a legacy that remains as raw and relevant as it was in that garage on Fountain Avenue in 1967. The heavy metal thunder still echoes, not as the sound of a unified band, but as the enduring roar of a generation that refused to be silent. Steppenwolf proved that the greatest anthems can emerge from the darkest places. Refugee camps, garage rehearsals, the open highway. They sold 25 million records and invented a genre with 3 words. But the control that built their empire became the weapon that destroyed their brotherhood. The music survived, the band didn't. When you hear Born to be Wild today, remember, it's not just a song, it's the sound of freedom earned the hard way. What's your Steppenwolf memory? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories of rock's greatest triumphs and tragedies.